Good morning. Today is Thursday, April 15th. It's 9:02 a.m. This is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. And this morning, we have a number of things we're doing today. Four different things we're working on. It's that time of year. But we're starting the day with a visit with Commissioner Michael Snyder. Perhaps several weeks back when we were having a general discussion about loss of forests. One of the things that came up was a request to say we can see this, troublesome trend, and we thought it would be helpful to check in with Commissioner Snyder and say we all have been doing. We're all concerned. What's the big plan on addressing the situation? And then we also have a second visit with Commissioner Snyder after, and that is we've been visiting with each operating area, 3 commissioners at ANR plus TJ Poor at DPS to say, for the first time in our legislative or government lives, we're seeing money available to invest in a way that we've never seen before. So looking out 1, 3, 5 years, and maybe even further, how is each operating area prioritizing work, and what's their perspective on how to sort of pick up the pace with money available that we've never seen before? But first, it's really back to the original conversation that we asked to have, which on our agenda, I don't know if Commissioner Snyder thinks of it this way, but it says forest health and integrity, forest parks and recreation plans and programs for protection and recovery. So good morning, Commissioner Snyder. Good to see you. You're looking very sharp this morning.
Well, good morning. Thank you. I'll just say thank you. Further comment on that. Happy to be with you and I appreciate the invitation. Shall I jump in, Senator Bray, and begin?
Yes, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. So for the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner, Forest, Parks and Recreation, and again, happy to be with you. Thanks for the invitation and the introduction. I think what beginning with the first question, and I do accept and agree with the way you teed it up there, and again, appreciate that chance. I have a slideshow, a little bit of a PowerPoint, a few slides that I will, if I can, I'll share the screen and use that to kind of guide the conversation in a sort of an overview, recognizing new biennium, a couple new members. It's been some time, so I wanted to just kind of level set on the issue, and then walk through some sort of high level summaries of the kind of categories of work that we see as being helpful. And then what I would do is share with you, then I have a written report of those policies, programs, initiatives, et cetera. A little bit of a summary of what's been done and where we see opportunities for going forward. So I'd like to share the screen, walk you through a little bit of presentation, and then drill in further, then follow with a written summary to you that I'll share with Jude at the conclusion of my testimony. That sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Great. I will now attempt to share the screen, and I hope this all goes well. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Revisiting forest health and integrity.
Great. Here we go. So again, and I'm not sure, what I'm seeing is my collection of tiles showing you folks is now obscuring some of my screen. Does that happen to you as well?
No, we can see I believe we see your full
PowerPoint.
Great.
Well, it's just a little bit of an inconvenience for me then, and I can live with that. So what I wanted to begin with was sort of recognize that we all collectively have been, have acknowledged, recognized, documented, acknowledged, and have been talking about the importance of forest health and integrity for some time now, going back to before the Forest Fragmentation Report that we delivered in 2015. through that time. And then that was followed with Act 61, I believe it was, in 2016, that called on us to follow up with a report on recommendations in support of forest health and integrity, after we had kind of described the problem and what was at stake, with some 5 categories of potential policy development areas. This was the one that followed. We often refer to the 2015 Fragmentation Report, but this one had a little bit more in it in terms of what could be done to reverse the trends of forest loss and maintain forest integrity and value. So we started there, and I want to just give a kind of a recap of that work, and then again, where do we go from there?
Great. And Commissioner Snyder, can you send over the 2016 report? Actually, how about both of them? That way Jude can put them up on our website, and we'll have both the 2015 and 16 available to the public as well. Thank you.
Of course. So again, just by way of background and level set, a quick state of the forest kind of summary here. You know, we are heavily forested. The 4th most forested state in the country of 4.5 million acres. That's about almost 75% of the state's land is covered in forests. And as I like to say, this, you know, we are forest strong. There are many, 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 many benefits that accrue to all Vermonters through public and private forest lands. Ecological benefits like biodiversity, habitat connectivity, clean water, clean air, carbon storage, sequestration, flood resilience, water supply, air pollution control. We can go on and on. There are also more monetized benefits, particularly the $1.5 billion forest economy with some 10,000 jobs, et cetera. And we can enumerate those benefits in these broad categories. And of course, cultural benefits, our quality of life, an outdoor kind of lifestyle, and a legacy of healthy outdoor life. And that's quite a package. Again, I could present a whole slideshow on the benefits of Vermont's forests, but I'll leave it at that, knowing that you all understand and acknowledge them well. But just as a starting point, there's a lot here that's at stake when we consider loss of forest land, both privately and publicly. The values that accrue to all of us from a healthy, intact forested condition. And this is really the nut of the question that Senator Campion raised to me by way of clarification in our confirmation hearing, asking, you know, we've heard various things. Are we losing forest land? And I just want to state, as I did then, that the answer is simply yes. By all accounts, although accounts vary on how much and where, we've settled on using the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program data and summaries. That's the so-called FIA data, Forest Inventory and Analysis, which is a systematic, quantification of forest lands across the country by state, and they prepare a very succinct and detailed report on the status of Vermont's forests. So I've summarized it here for you to indicate that according to those FIA data, we are losing just over 11,000 acres of net forest land converted to non-forest annually, which, roughly speaking, that's about 0.5% of our forest land every year. If you wanted to just kind of project that out to 2050, under current trends, that's 325,000 acres of forest land lost in that time. And just simply making the point that although it's a small number now, we are still heavily forested. It is generally in good shape. We are still enjoying many benefits. But this is an inflection point in history. We have spent since the agricultural wave of the 1700s into the early 1800s, since then in a recovery state, in a state of aggradation, increasing forest land, increasing area, size, age, etc. And for the first time in 100 years, that's tipped the other way. And this is the basic metric that indicates the level of change that we're seeing now.
Commissioner Snyder, can you say when we went from net, when did the pendulum start to swing back from net gain or sort of a static state to beginning of a loss? How far back in time is that?
I believe the
Would you-
first FIA data that signaled this was in the early 2010 maybe. So it was shortly before the 2015 report that we indicated, hey, this is that inflection point. And so it's really it's in the last decade that flip has happened.
Thank you.
And as I said, we have been talking about this together and collectively, and I want to acknowledge, as Senator Bray did on the Senate floor last summer, there's been good work done in a variety of kind of dimensions here, much of which was called for in these various reports. So, including that, all the way back to the Act 118 of 2014 that really kicked it all off, coming out of S100 at the time. So we have just a quick summary here. And again, the written document I'll send you shows more details here with links, et cetera. But the right to conduct forestry operations, developing the logger safety and workers' compensation program, reducing prohibitive expenses in workers' compensation for the very dangerous profession of logging, creating forester licensing, updating the timber trespass laws to take them from simply a civil matter to a criminal matter. I've done a tremendous amount of work in municipal planning, providing sample ordinances and guidance for towns and how to plan for forest blocks and connecting habitat. We've created the sales and use tax exemptions for forestry equipment, equaling what has been enjoyed in the agricultural sector for some time, and more. So again, we've done a lot, and it's really meaningful, and I want to acknowledge that we're grateful for the role that you've all played in helping us do these things, and they're significant.
May I ask, Mr. Chair?
Senator Campion.
So which of those would you say has contributed the most to stopping what I think we're all in agreement in what we're trying to stop, which is the decrease in the amount of forest?
Well, I think they're taking, I appreciate the question, and I think later in the presentation I'll get to some more detail on that, Senator Campion, but I think what I would say here is that I don't know that any of these in and of itself was sufficient or even uniquely impactful. It really has to be taken in the aggregate. And to me, that's what it represents, is a collective understanding. It reflects this collective realization that forests really matter and that there are a variety of approaches to reversing this trend and maintaining the benefits that forests provide. So I would point here, when pressed, I really do think that the biggest one, the most impactful, given the role that good logging plays in keeping forests forest, I think the work that's been done on the workers' comp side is historic and really impactful. I think forester licensing over time, as it normalizes, it's still really relatively young in its role. I think that will help play a role. And I think the municipal planning has been really significant, and the assistance to communities to help with understanding what they have and the tools available to them, whether it's BioFinder, VC, Vermont Conservation Design, technical assistance from Fish and Wildlife, FPR, colleagues in the environmental advocacy community. A lot of programming has been done through these pieces, working with realtors. I'm going to cover some of this later as we go, but so I really think it's more about the collective reflection that we have a lot to do, and we're working on some pretty big pieces here and have done those. And I think in time they will start to support the other pieces that I think we need to fill in on. Hope that's helpful for now. So indeed, we are forest strong with all these various benefits, and the point is to keep it that way. This is a really good deal for Vermont. It's cost effective. The kind of green infrastructure, the nature-based solutions that forests, healthy, intact forests provide, they do. This is I would call it a unique competitive advantage for Vermont, our forests, and the values and functions they provide, ecosystem services, economic and cultural. We can't outsource them. And when we lose them, it's over. And it's going to be extremely expensive to replace the values that they provide. So we are forest strong. It's generally in good shape, but I want to acknowledge that there are troubling indicators beyond forest loss. and that kind of contribute to or exacerbate forest loss. So that would be market and workforce challenges in the forest economy. Poor regeneration and localized overbrowsing that it really threatens forest sustainability, health, and the options that we have for managing them. The proliferation of invasive plants, pests, and pathogens is severe and really damaging to the healthy function of forests. And then, of course, the conversion to non-forest has been identified as the key driver in forest fragmentation. And we want to drill into the root causes, particularly there, as we look to solutions. So here, as was requested, I've summarized, built upon those two prior forest fragmentation and forest integrity reports, the kind of categories that were listed for areas of policy development. And as requested, I would say these are still the broad categories, and this is the priority in descending order. I think right now what we would point to, and I'll follow with further here, is the support for sustainable forestry in the Vermont forest economy, increasing landowner incentives for keeping forests forested, investment in strategic forest land conservation, and outreach and education to forest values and benefits. They're all important, but I think that the bottom one there is one that we're best at, and we've done really great things with our staff and colleagues at Fish and Wildlife in particular. It's an amazing team of professionals really providing a lot of good outreach, and we're building upon that. Moving from the bottom up, I think the advent of Vermont conservation design is the best example of strategic, enhanced approaches to forest land conservation, scientifically informed, providing targets, and a really key mechanism. And you've heard much about that. So again, important, but more in the implementation phase now. And I think then we look to the first two bullets would be how do we make it work for landowners to resist pressures to convert their land, whether it's at the end of their ownership in intergenerational transfer or in paying bills and costs of ownership and other life expenses along the way and having options so as to not have to just subdivide. There are many there, and I think support for maintenance of the importance of the current use program, which has really been our most successful conservation program, it would be key there. And then we're back to what remains as what we consider to be our last best hope. Really is the opportunity that lives in modernizing our forest economy, recognizing that some of its ills and challenges are globally induced and well beyond our direct control. But there are some things we can do, and I think the pandemic has put a light on this, showing the interruption in supply chains, the loss of paper and medical packaging and medical instruments based on paper and wood. For example, the shutdown, particularly last spring, demonstrated how vulnerable we are because we have depended so much on others. We export a lot, we add value elsewhere. We need to reverse that and depend more on using our local forest resources locally, retaining that money and those jobs in state and doing it our way in an ecologically based way. There's opportunities here for us to rethink our energy as we consider climate change and our energy economy. Doing so in tandem with a vision to doing so through our forest economy has lots of value and merit. And I'm eager to share with you some ideas we have there. So those are the big categories. For the kinds of the plan, as Senator Bray put it, for reversing this.
Hey, Chuck.
Mr. Chairman, would you have thanks?
Thank you. So the remaining slides here would just kind of go back to these are basically the categories and broad areas for policy development in the 2016 recommendations for supporting forest health and integrity. And again, our first priority bucket would be support for sustainable forestry in the Vermont forest economy. These were the categories, and supporting improved training for loggers, protecting and improving this infrastructure that supports these local industries, expand modern wood heating in Vermont, Modern wood heating, I hope you know, means when we say that, we mean it's also often referred to as advanced wood heating. This is clean burning with respect to the atmosphere and if highly efficient with respect to the fuel source. As opposed to dirty old wood boilers outside, this is not that. And the technology exists. You've helped with sales tax exemptions and a variety of incentives through the Clean Energy Development Fund. This is in the Comprehensive Energy Plan, the existing one, that points to goals, hard goals for increasing the amount, particularly in our thermal needs, to achieve thermal goals, heating goals through modernized wood heating. There are jobs, there are climate benefits and substitutions for fossil fuels here, really, really positive. The challenge, of course, is that those fossil fuels, particularly on the heating side, are cheap. They are cheap if you only consider the immediate cost, not the externalized costs and the true cost accounting. But so that conversation should continue. We also need to continue to expand markets for Vermont wood products. Instead of shipping low grade and other raw materials elsewhere, Canada, China, elsewhere in this country for value adding, we need to think about how to do that value adding here. And we also want to capitalize on really, really positive developments in wood utilization, nanocellulosic technology. When we break down wood into its fibers and to make pulp, to make paper, given the loss of demand on paper, particularly certain types, and the loss of those mills regionally, it's really interesting to know that that same process can then turn those pulp products into concrete additives, food additives, replacements for insulation, and many other products that we use all day long in our daily lives. And they often through fossil fuel-based plastics, and they can be replaced by wood technology. That's really exciting, and it's worth looking towards those. And maybe Vermont can position itself as a leader in modern wood technology applications and business. And of course, with the last one here is we were asked to recognize and to promote the value of forests in recreation and tourism. Our forests are the natural infrastructure for this world-class recreation system we have. And it's, of course, the scenic backdrop to our very important tourism economy. And they're all connected. It's consistent. These are consistent. The working lands of farms and family forests with outdoor recreation and tourism. It's quite a package, and we want to cross-promote, and we want to be able to use that human engagement in recreation for awareness and support. And we realize there are some opportunities here, and we want to think about those. Again, moving into the couple other buckets, the increasing landowner incentives to keep forests forest. First, do no harm to current use. 2 million acres of forest land in the current use program, and growing, has some issues. We need to make sure, the increasing number of parcels, that the increase in the number of parcels outstrips the rate of increase in acres. So that's an interesting trend. I know Senator Westman has been paying attention to this for a long time. What it basically means is an increase in smaller parcels. That's parcelization. As long as it's in current use, it's not fragmentation because it's being held as forest. But that's a trend, and we want to pay attention to that. There have been recommendations to look at modernizing our property tax system. That is the idea of not needing current use because we move away from ad valorem taxation and consider a use value system as our taxing system. There have been blue ribbon commissions and looking at taxes. This hasn't happened yet, but it's been on the table, and I think it's interesting. Until such time where we reimagine how we tax property, real property, current use is critical. I'll leave that at that. We want to continue to look. We've created a report and submitted it to a few years ago on implications for intergenerational transfer and the opportunities that exist there to think strategically about minimizing chances for transfer when people get to difficult portions in their life at the end and have limited opportunities. We want to make sure folks have a good bag of tricks and mixed options and guidance. And then the last piece here is really exciting to think about what's emerging in the way of carbon offset markets for monetizing the carbon storage and sequestration values of forests. And again, I'll drill into some details here. We've had a legislative working group on this subject. We continue to work on it in the department. And again, in my written report details some of this for you. But those are some, drilling in here, large bucket, basic categories within that bucket, and then some details to follow in each of these categories. Still working towards, we have a tremendous, I think you all know it, really great legacy, history and legacy and list of accomplishments in farm and forest land conservation throughout the state, in A&R ownerships, A&R easements, and those with all of our partners in the land trust and conservation community. It's a lot to be proud of. An awful lot's been done, and we're, I think, getting even better at it, especially as we develop these new enhanced tools like Vermont Conservation Design to guide and inform these processes. I think funding continues to be, you've heard this from many advocates, how do we have robust funding sources we've been very creative with federal programs and granting, philanthropy, support from regular Vermonters. It's a great mix. We need to continue to do that because of the clear importance of permanent conservation of forest land to protect its values. And the last bucket that was considered was, considering outreach and education. That's generally direct assistance and technical assistance and guidance to landowners. We want to do more and more through our education system, assistance to towns, to regional commissions, watershed groups, et cetera. And then understanding the connection of what we consider the forest continuum, if you will, from the top of Mount Mansfield to Church Street. It all matters. Green infrastructure in our built environment, green spaces in where we live, as well as wild forests and working forests. It's a continuum, and we need to see it that way and help all Vermonters see it that way and look for the opportunities to support it.
I have a sort of a narrow, quick question on that. Does Vermont have a robust, I hope the answer is yes, program for tree planting in communities?
Yes, we have our urban community program with partners with UVM Extension. We have a whole statewide coalition and guidance group, and we have grant programs. We have assistance for planning and for planting for many, many years. Most of the trees in towns that have been planted have had some hand of our folks in either guiding encouraging them or providing planning assistance or helping them get grants and actually implement those plans through planting. And it's robust and ongoing.
Great, thank you.
You bet. Not listed in any of those forest fragmentation reports really was any kind of modern or sophisticated view of climate effects, which has been mentioned, but the role of forests, the sort of dual reality of forests as being vulnerable to climate change, and we're already seeing those changes, as well as being the best solution to mitigate atmospheric carbon dioxide. And so we wanted to just note that we can do more here and are doing more here. A couple quick things, we have hired, we received some grant funding from American Forests. We've hired the first climate forester. Dr. Ali Kusiba has joined our team last year and has been very busy helping to further the goals and recommendations of the legislative Vermont Forest Carbon Working Group. To create a bunch of outreach materials, which was recommended. Basically, what is forest carbon? I will share all these with you. They're wonderful, well created and easy to read and dense with information that's accessible. An explanation of the Vermont Forest Carbon Inventory, like what is it? Like how much do we have? What's stored? What proportion of our emissions are being sequestered and stored by our forests? Does that continue? How? So it's really an amazing document here. And then a primer on carbon markets for Vermont landowners. What do you need to know? How do you do it? What's involved? And at the same time, we've created, through Ali's leadership and our team, an agency team looking at creating a pilot program for enrolling state forest land, maybe a wildlife management area, some state park forest lands, into carbon offsets as a pilot to demonstrate for private landowners, perhaps serving as a hub for aggregation of private landowners. The smaller parcels have some challenges in enrollment, so we want to overcome those. So I'm just trying to point out, broadly here that this area of ecosystem services through carbon and the possibilities exist has been an area of real activity for us since those reports. And I think they contribute to landowner incentives. They kind of touch all these buckets. And I think it's really worth drilling into those and supporting those.
Just as a quick note in passing. So I worked with Michael O'Grady back in November, December timeframe, and he drafted a ecosystem services bill, but we had so much on our plate that I didn't introduce what I didn't think we could actually take on, but it's in the wings. And so I'd love to talk with you more and come back to that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, were you saying, would you repeat what you said? What exactly is in the wings?
So there's a draft bill on ecosystem services, the major portion of which relates to forest land, since it's 74% of what's out there. And so that bill, I didn't end up introducing it, but I know that we had committee conversations and there's an interest, and it'd be great if we come back to it in the second half of the biennium.
Thank you.
Great. So that, that was kind of this reset, level set, broad overview. And I think what I'd like to do now is actually, because it seems we may have time, if you wish, Mr. Chair, I could share the written document. And, it's not as pretty as a PowerPoint, and maybe just kind of walk through some of the details of these categories and work areas with an update on what's been done and more particularly showing our recommendations for where to go next. Shall I do that? Does that work?
Sure. And a question from Senator Campion before we go there.
Yeah, and I think and maybe this is the document that I'm looking for. I think we've all identified this as a problem, continues to be a problem. What are the things that we really can be doing and to address it? This is, as I said, our shared legacy, everybody in this room, yours, mine, the chairs, everybody. And I feel like we are not addressing this in the way that we need to be addressing it, recognizing that, yes, there are some things out there, climate change, other things, invasive species connected to that are sort of are global issues that we are not going to necessarily be able to address. But I'm not comfortable that we're being as robust and as strong as we need to be on this issue. So that's what I'm hoping for. And knowing that we don't have a lot of time, I just don't want to get to the end of this next document and still have that question. So whichever way you can do it would be appreciated.
Yes, that's the plan. And I think you weren't here at the beginning when I teed up that that's exactly what the plan was, Senator. And again, recognizing a new biennium, folks listening and watching and new members, I thought it was important to just be clear about what we're talking about, where we've been, and make sure we're all on the same page. So I will turn to that now with that level of detail. And bear with me as I attempt to share. So, okay, so here's the document that I'll submit through Jude to you all, but the idea here is responsive to the request, revisiting forest health and integrity, update on accomplishments and recommendations for the future. A little bit of a background, which I've spent through, you understand. And we pick up on, again, that we always refer to the 15 report, but it was the 16 report that had detailed recommendations. So we wanted to go through these categories and share with you what's been done and what's left to do. I'm going to start in our priority order and begin here with the forest economy, where we think there's the most opportunity left to do. So this is the same hierarchy and the same language that was used, except for what's written here is when you see update or something in this greenish blue, that's what we're responding to. So recommendation 4A was to support and improve training for loggers. And that's the actual wording right here. Update is that we've made very little progress here. We have a recommendation for a priority focus area. Specifically, some things have happened and they've been good, and we would recommend continuing them. So recommended priority focus, Act 83 in 2019, just a couple years ago, provided funding to the Logger Education to Advance Professionalism and the Master Logger Program to support safety training costs and program enrollment. This has been very important in the workers' comp space, and we would recommend continuing there. We also want to kind of connect this level of professional training for safety and professionalism, environmental awareness, et cetera, with enhancing existing curricula in vocational schools. There's a pipeline problem here, and this is kind of a workforce issue. So there's a lot of possibilities here. I'm going to go real quickly through here because this will come to you in writing as well. It was recommended to appoint a legislative study committee for cost containment. This has basically been done. We recommend continued support. This is the work that's been done to create the Logger Safety and Workers' Compensation Insurance Program, working with our partners, wonderful work at Financial Regulation and Department of Labor to help pull this together. This is historic work, and it's really meaningful, but it needs to continue, and that does call for some funding kind of possibilities there. We were asked to consider a partnership between VTC and UVM's to create kind of a 2+2 type program like they have in dairy for forestry, recognizing, you know, I went to UVM forestry for a Bachelor of Science. That's not for everybody. We need that other level. We need credentialing, certificate programs, associate level degrees in this kind of pipeline. This has begun, and it's in its infancy, and it deserves support and to be continued. There was a recommendation to create a stars-based rating program for loggers and others in the forest sector. Still eager on this. Unfortunately, some bad actors get all the press and sort of tarnish the whole lot. So we want to, I think this was recognizing that the majority are real professional and do amazing work that we depend on, and we want to continue that. That's more of a cultural thing, I would say, but I think there's some places here for us to work on. The 4B was to protect and improve infrastructure that supports the local wood industry. Many specific recommendations. Here's where we've checked some boxes: establishing forester licenses, a criminal trespass for timber trespass. We delivered a report on the implementation of harvest notification in Vermont per your request, et cetera. Three-phase power was identified as a limitation in this sector. Thanks to the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, grants have been made for folks in rural communities to upgrade three-phase to increase efficiency and profitability. Again, continuing support for Working Enterprise Initiative grants is key here for those sorts of things. We were recommended to update the sales use tax exemptions. That's been done. We have recommendations that continue to be a problem for how to deal with consistency, clarity, and uniformity of truck weights regulations and permits throughout the state. We've been working well with AOT to find solutions here. This is, you know, wood is very heavy. Trucks are heavy loaded. They have a real impact on the roads and bridges. So we have to balance this. There's also other issues with downtowns, et cetera. Everyone recognizes this is a need, but it's tricky and challenging. But this has been, given climate change, we need to change, and based on the conditions of roads and the timing of when materials can move, this is an area that still needs work. It's been vexing, but I think we would recommend and have some progress, but we need some help here, I think, with creative thinking, given the trickiness of it and the balance, how to get it right. A recommendation was made to establish that right to conduct forestry operations and limit nuisance lawsuits. That's been done. There was also a recommendation to support forest-based enterprises as they move through the permitting world. There was grant program that you helped establish in Act 83 of 2019. We recommend continuation. That's been helpful. It was small, kind of a pilot, but it sends a signal in general and of support and value, but it also is practically helpful. So we're grateful for that and recommend continuation there. Again, continuing support for the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, increased technical assistance and business planning along the forest economy value chain. Vermont Housing Conservation Board and its farm and forest viability program. Forest was added to the program. It's been very helpful. This has been identified as a key limitation in this sector, is the business planning in forest businesses. It's been helpful, needs to continue. Here we get to some pretty big ones. You've heard about them before, and I think there's real opportunities. The expanding modern wood heat in Vermont, as I explained earlier, is not a single solution, but it is a big contributor. It can be a big contributor to kind of this whole shift to a modern Vermont forest economy. So continuing on support of the Clean Energy Development Fund's support for incentivizing installation of advanced wood heat systems at scale. So think about the Capitol complex. More than a third of schools are heated with wood. They're aging out. We need to support that, continue that. There's real opportunities here. I will note, we'll get to this later when we talk about ARPA funding. One of the buckets does propose $1.5 million surge into the Clean Energy Development Fund for wood energy, and we support that with enthusiasm. There was a call to realign Efficiency Vermont's thermal energy performance metrics. That's been done, and we're pleased with that. Act 56 and the Tier 3 program encouraged compliance and provided some incentives. 3 utilities now offer rebates on advanced wood heat equipment. That's a fantastic development. We want to support that and continue. We also want to keep track, and this is something we used to do with Partners at Public Service. That was asked. We recommend revisiting this with an enhanced outreach strategy. Again, all the way through here, some work's been done, but I think here we start to see where the role of the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Council and its current work, this is very much consistent. And I want to just say clearly that we want to sort of allow that work to unfold. We're advising our climate foresters, playing a staffing role there. I think there's a lot of possibilities. I'm really optimistic that when that work is completed, you'll see similar recommendations related to the energy economy, wood energy, and forests as part of the overall package of meeting climate mitigation goals. Let's see. I'm going to spin ahead to expanding markets for Vermont wood products. Again, wood heating is part of that. Promoting the branding of products made from Vermont wood that recognizes consumers' interest in forest health and sustainability. This is a real area of possibility for us. We have a great story. It starts with the Vermont brand, a sense that we have it, that it's clean and good and we do it right. We really want to capitalize on that as we try to expand how we produce, manufacture, sell, and market wood products and cross-promote with other key Vermont brands and products like world-class foods, beer, etc. A major area of policy development here would be in pursuing a whole new approach to building, constructing, particularly institutional facilities, multi-story buildings, the onset of what's called mass timber construction, which includes a variety, including cross-laminate timbers. This is the idea of using relatively small pieces of mostly softwood so far, made in sort of mega plywood. Like these are timbers glued perpendicularly to each other in massive panels that are prefabricated as in a manufacturing site, and then are used in construction with massive benefits over concrete and steel, given the carbon footprint and embodied carbon, and then much easier on the job site, quieter, simpler, more efficient, and then they meet fire codes, they meet seismic codes. This is really an exciting area, and we are way behind Australia, Europe, the Pacific Northwest, even in this country. This is happening, and we're using low-grade wood in some cases, adding value and meeting climate goals by building smart with wood again. And we left that about 150 years ago with fires, and and it's time to get back to building with wood beyond flooring, trim, moldings, cabinetry, which are all still true. But there's this really, there's a whole lot here, and this is a big area for us to consider. And I'll touch on this later in the ARPA section, but think about the possibilities as we look at brownfield redevelopment and reinvestment to try to attract mass timber manufacturers here, and rebuild that forest economy while we remediate and redevelop brownfield sites, for example, potentially with federal assistance. A lot of possibilities here.
Commissioner Snyder, is the technology well enough developed that it's not so much an R&D issue at this point as attracting someone who wants to make the investment in equipment in order to begin manufacturing?
Definitely. It is no longer an R&D question. There is an R&D question for me, which we want to push on, and I've mentioned it here later, to work with University of Massachusetts, University of Maine, that have some of these engineering and testing labs. So far, it is happening. It's not a pilot, it's not demonstration, it's not exploratory. Mass timber construction is happening with vigor, but it's happening with softwoods, and that's not our strength here. We don't have a production softwood mill in this state. That would have to happen elsewhere. But I truly believe that once we can get the engineering standards established, species like red maple, soft maple, and beech, which are proliferating in our state, and have very few markets of any sort of value beyond firewood and wood energy, I have to believe that they can pass muster for this application. And that's a real great area of promise for us.
Okay.
We are working in a multi-state regional approach to consider how to make this move forward. And to your point, it's about attracting someone, and it's a bit of a chicken and the egg at this point, to be honest, about, we need the engineer, the architects and designers to call for this. They need to know it's possible and it makes good sense. So we need to have a market signal for someone to respond to. And some of the builders and the designers are saying, well, we need a manufacturer. So that's the chicken and the egg, and I could use some help sort of breaking through that. So how do we are proposing or pursuing a pilot program here in the state. The Fairbanks Museum in St. Johnsbury is developing a mass timber addition to their facility there, and they've been great about telling the story and why they're doing it. So one great example of a pilot project here, which we hope will stimulate some market demand.
Okay. And just so we have the right picture in our heads, there was an era in construction where I remember seeing lots of public buildings with very large laminated, like arched beams and things like that. Is that what we're talking about?
So that's part of it. There's the laminated arched beams, et cetera, structural members that are becoming, that are part of this. But the really exciting development is going beyond just that skeleton of the framing to have like walls that are created as wood panel. And then you're seeing those. They're beautiful. There are studies that are talking about how people learn better, commerce works better when they're surrounded by wood features. So this is building, these are panels that go up. Think of like a timber frame, but the stuff between the timber frame is now also wood panels, but it's not paneling. There are these massive panels that are structural.
Right. Okay, great.
Yes, it's very exciting. Real possibilities here.
Senator McCormick has a question.
Thanks. Could you explain to me the difference between a cross-laminated panel and plywood?
Sure, it's a great question. It's really great to start with plywood, which is the idea of these thin veneers being glued together in sort of perpendicular fashion to add that mechanical strength. That this is the same thing. It's just what's being glued together instead of being thin veneers are like 2x6s. big members they're like blocks, you know, a row this way and then a row that way, glued up together, framed, and all according, and they use, you know, computer aided design to cut out windows and chases for utility lines, et cetera. So it's a manufacturing process, you know, kind of working with, kind of think of it as plywood on steroids.
It differs, as I understand, it differs from particle board
Oh,
in that these are longer pieces.
well, much bigger than the little chips that you would see in the particle
Yeah.
board. These are massive, and so they're structural as well, and they last a really long time. They store carbon. They allow you to not use that, to avoid steel and concrete, which are really expensive and have a terrible climate footprint. So again, just benefit on benefit on benefit, all the way back to the forest land. And that's why we're so sanguine about it, and really want to push in this direction.
So these are not competing with plywood, they're competing with big steel panels?
Yes, steel, you would see steel girders, aluminum studs, and then lots of steel kind of walls. There's a lot of that being done, and this would replace that. It also it can replace, you know, the traditional stick-built construction framing.
You wouldn't need the 16 inches on center 2x4s because you've already got it.
It
Okay.
replaces that, right?
Thank you.
Senator Campion?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I apologize, I probably missed this in the beginning, but when we're thinking as a committee, what is the one underlying cause of the forest decline in this state? You know, if a constituent were to come to me and say, all right, you're all working on this, you know, and I know we have to look at it at the aggregate, and there are all these different things, but what is the one cause right now? The biggest?
It's conversion to non-forest, and by far the majority of that is conversion to what we heretofore have referred to as development. I don't prefer the phrase because I don't think it's an accurate reflection of what's happening, and you know, we need human habitat too. I want to really make sure to say that, and it's all about how and where and when, and but that's it. It's the conversion has been, there's some conversion to agriculture, but very, very little. There's more going the other way, ag back to forest. It's conversion to a built environment.
So if this committee were to work in part on that, you could come in with recommendations as to how to address that. Either again,
I'm doing so right now. These are
Okay.
those. These are they. I'm saying that's the premise here, is that, I mean, we'll get to others, but we would suggest that the priority is to provide, right now, the conversion is driven by many things, and we're not going to change many of those things, and we want to have more people come here, but some things can change, which is what are the options landowners have for developing their land. We've done a lot of planning and design work and recommendations. That's good. And what we're saying now is we need a culture and an economy that supports working forests in a real way, in a modern way that has other co-benefits. That's why I'm presenting this material here. You're wondering, what about mass timber? How does that stop somebody? Well, it might not stop you from subdividing your land or me, but it does mean we have other options for keeping forests. I'm asking you to think broadly about this as a different approach that reflects the true nature of the challenge here, and we're going to have to come at it from multiple places and multiple perspectives. And this is one that has real promise because it's cost effective, it has co-benefits, it lines up with other priorities like climate mitigation, the biodiversity crisis, and you know, maybe it's a little counterintuitive, and I'm still struggling to get that across to folks, that we're going to save forests by cutting trees and using them intelligently and locally. That's the premise.
no, I appreciate that. And that is, you know, your idea. And I think it could be absolutely, you know, spot on. I think though, what I would like to hear, and this is more for the chair, is, you know, when we do talk about a range of issues in this committee, we bring in more than just, of course, our commissioners. We appreciate our commissioners, and we know that they're in these leadership positions. But given this serious, you know, this, you know, I would like to hear from also others that are working with their planning folks, their version of Act 250, what sorts of either states or even countries might be doing things that are perhaps, exactly in line with the direction we're going in, or are there other new bold ideas out there that this state needs to consider as we're looking at Act 250, as our, as our Committee on Economic Development is working on housing, just to make sure everybody is connected and in line as much as possible.
For what it's worth, I support that. I encourage you to hear from all kinds, and I'm confident that, and not encourage you, I really implore you to hear from others on this whole array. And I am quite confident that you'll hear much from many. There are people with more expertise than me, other expertise than mine, and do so. And I'm quite confident it'll sync up. There will be great support for the broad ideas here, if some differences on, certain specifics here and there. Further, as state forester, I engage with colleagues across the country. All states are grappling with this. We actually have a chance to get it right, well ahead of many others. And most of the states that have a Global Warming Solutions Act type legislation and are working through that now are making the same recommendations. This is not Mike Snyder and some political sort of position here, kind of ignoring the sky falling and with my little pet project here. This is robust, it's comprehensive, and it's consistent with the best thinking across this country, if I don't mind saying so myself.
But no, and I appreciate that. I do, and I know that you welcome us hearing from other folks. But I do think we need to. I think this loss is dramatic. It continues to happen year after year after year. Are there things that this legislature needs to do to really put a pause on this kind of thing? And
yes,
and there are things that we can do, but I think we also all agree that the house is on fire. And how do we put this out, even just temporarily, so we can make certain we know that we have the right path going forward. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and so, again, I completely agree. I just do, and I encourage you to do so. But I would ask you to, I really do, as you explore that, we put a lot of work into this. This reflects a lot of people over many years, good people, smart people working hard. I really do ask you to just take the time that it will take, it's not that long, to read through this, actually all of it, and take it in totality, and see what you've helped do and feel good about that. And then see where we're recognizing, continue this or add this, or now we got to turn in this direction. I would ask you to just look at this. I made it as concise as possible. It's quite something when you consider what we've done together. It's meaningful, and then where it directs us next. And I bet, Senator Campion, you're going to come out of that. If you do so with an open mind, you'll say, you know what, I'm sort of interested in a package of stuff here. And what about this? And you may reject others, and that's fine. But I just ask you to give it a fair shake, because I think frankly, I'm just saying, what you're asking is what I've tried to do here. And I hope that you'll at least give it the legitimate chance to consider.
Sure. No, of course. I think like everything else, when a plan comes, again, before us, we just want to, take a range of testimony, dig into it, understand it. And I think, the other piece, there was something else I was going to mention along these lines. It's like so much that we do in the legislature. We have these problems before us, and I think through testimony and other ways, we might be able to find something that we all agree upon in addition to this work, or maybe we add to it depending on the need. One question, actually, now I'm recalling it. So if we were to go forward with everything, when do we start to see this change? When do we start to see a change in terms of where, the report that would say, all right, these things have been implemented. Now we're seeing a change in terms of land loss or forest loss.
I wish I knew. I want to say tomorrow, or actually yesterday. This is really important for Vermont and our future, and well beyond forest. I just really believe that. And and if I had if I had it all figured out, I'd have shared it with you a long time ago. I know that you're interested and you want action. I don't know when. This is a big ship and it takes a long time to turn it. We are working against global forces and frankly, an awareness gap that is massive. An illiteracy, if you will, about the importance of forests, the role of forests in our lives, the role of forest products in our lives, the daily use of it. Most of us have no clue. And that's a real malaise. And it's really working against us here. And the climate crisis is really this call that I actually see as maybe it's our chance for people to say, okay, actually, every report that's ever been written on any continent about climate change by any authors has started with keep forests. That's it. And I'm trying to propose a comprehensive suite of approaches across a range of types that support keeping forests. That's the goal. There is not one thing. There isn't. That's it. And so I love the question, like, when's this going to change? It's going to change when we value forests and we value the role that working forests play. And we use forests for all of their good and power in a productive and sustainable way. And we have the ability to do it. We have the technology, we have the expertise. We don't have a cultural appetite for it. We don't. It's not convenient. That has to change.
Well, I would say that the legislature has made changes historically in the United States when the country has not had appetites for cultural changes. And
Yes.
That is when government has, in some ways, can be at its absolute best. Because I know you agree that the legislature and this committee has an appetite for this work. So what I don't want to do is, again, I get it. We need to educate people. That's part of history. That's part of the culture. Is to work in advance and help people to understand the work that we're doing. But there may be things, of course, and I know you're proposing some of them that need to be done before we get everybody up to where we're at.
Absolutely. I totally agree. We can't wait to have everybody up. It's this organic process that some will feed on itself. And I totally agree with that. We have to take steps, continue to work towards the big and do all the things we can. Totally agree. I see there's hands here. Sorry.
So before we go to Senator McCormick, I'd like to propose, I'm mindful of the clock that I don't want to interrupt this important discussion, but I also want to let Commissioner Snyder finish his presentation. We'll take a brief break. And really there's a natural connection between, I think, this report and the second report, which is related to what are we looking at prioritizing the next 1, 3, 5 years with monies that we've never had before. That because that's, to me, that seems like we are going to have the resources that we haven't had in order to maybe double down on some of these, implement some of the recommendations.
I hope so.
And given where we are in the legislative calendar, I think another thing too is I'm guessing many members of this committee would welcome having some sort of informal conversations between now and next January to be ready to come back and really hit the ground running on some of these, especially while money is available for a number of years to come. Exactly how much and for how long, we don't know yet, especially on the infrastructure bill. But okay, so before you wrap up, Senator McCormick's been patiently waiting. And Senator McCormick, we can't hear you yet.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
You hear me now? Okay, thanks. I have a lot of city friends, and it's very difficult to explain to them because they romanticize the countryside. It's hard to explain to them the economics of logging. And it's counterintuitive to say that logging preserves the forest. But it does, because we can have some publicly owned land taken off the tax rolls and supported by the taxpayers as recreational land. And there are some people who are affluent enough to own acreage and not use it. But for the most part, it has to be profitable to keep it forested, or at the very least, economically sustainable. So I get the importance of logging, not only directly to the economy, but also to maintaining the forest. Having said that, now I have laced up my green sneakers, and I do want to make this point, which is that the very term natural resources is anthrocentric. We think of natural features as resources, things for humans to use, which indeed they are and ought to be. But I think they should not be only that. And when we think of the recreational uses of the forest, I think there are people whose recreational use is not that they go out there to have fun, but they go out there to appreciate the forest on its terms, that it has intrinsic value. That rumbling sound you're hearing is the old boys of Vermont grumbling about how crazy I am. But I think there is truth in John Muir and that philosophy, which is to say that that nature has intrinsic value, and we need to have respect for the forest, and that, dare I say, spiritual value. And
Couldn't agree with you
that's
more.
not a criticism. I'm expanding on, and I'm not saying, therefore, that natural resources are not resources. I think we need just to broaden our view.
I couldn't agree
I
with
wish
you more.
this were not the yeah.
I do. You could ask folks at the agency, at the risk of getting myself in serious hot water here. I have said for years, it's a terrible name. Why are we called the Agency of Natural Resources? It should be the Agency of Environment or something. And I'm big on that. I'm an ecologist by training. That's my background. And it doesn't mean I can't be spiritual either. And so, I've taught students for years in forestry, we don't need, the forest doesn't need us. We need the forest. That's what this is all about. And we have inserted ourselves into it globally and locally, and we can't get out of that. So that's the idea of peaceful coexistence. And key to that is this maintaining this big chunk of reverence for forests and wild places. It's not that they need us, we need them, and working with them is possible. It's just not automatic. And so we're talking about building a culture that gets that, and a system, legal, institutional, and economic framework that sort of reflects that holistic view of forests as having intrinsic value, as well as this resource value. But I appreciate your request to change the nomenclature, because it gets in the way. I totally agree.
Yeah, I think so.
Senator Gray,
that's all I have.
Given the time and all, I've made the command decision to cease sharing and just send you the document.
Okay.
And because I just wanted to give you a sense of how it's organized, and it's responsive to previous recommendations and where we are and where we're going with those. I hope that makes sense to you. Happy to take further on this. Did you want to take that break now and then resume? How did you want to?
Yeah, so we have the next guest is you, and and it's in response to our question about just to remind the committee of the distinction. So we came back in January. There was $213 million state surplus. That meant that we got to see appropriations on some longstanding priorities. On top of that arrived ARPA money, which is allowing us to make further investments. And then in the offing is the infrastructure bill. We don't know what it will deliver, but hundreds of millions more that may be supportive of the work related to forestry and recreation, forest parks and recreations area. So just as Commissioner Walk was in, Mr. Poor was in, and Mr. Porter will be in, we wanted to hear. So here's the once in a lifetime chance. You just teed up a great background for us in terms of seeing what things we've done and where we could maybe be doubling down the kind of investments. So it's kind of like if what you delivered was the book, now we have an appendix to it. And so with that, I'd like to, it's 10:11 right now. Let's take just a 5-minute break since we're running a little long, and come back and we'll